Hey, what's up, guys? It's Apollo Uchiha here, back with another part of What If Naruto Was Sent Back in Time. And as promised, there's a link in the description for this story. If you want to check that out of the original writer, you can check that out as well. And if you haven't, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel if you like the content of this channel. And yeah, guys, without further ado, let's continue our story. Madara's home was smaller than he thought, and it didn't even have a future super evil bad guy that wanted to take over the world vibe he expected it to be. If anything, it was kind of plain, save for the collection of swords, kunais, scrolls, and ninja weapons that were displayed, some proudly in proper racks. Others were just kind of left nearby, and the giant Uchiha flags that flanked either side of Madara's seat. She sat on a large pile of multicolored pillows, looking every bit like a warlord, but that wasn't at all the person he had been seeing. Instead, he saw a beautiful woman with tired eyes and a smile that was filled with a twisted sense of humor. A bowl half full of the same gruel stew slop rested on her knees as he digested his words carefully. Is this what it felt like listening to him? For someone? No wonder Ika Sensei always wanted him to listen. So, that's pretty much it. He scratched his head. A bowl of somehow still warm stew stuff was clasped in his other hand. It was a refill. Madara was with her cooking as she was with all things, prideful. Despite the protest of his mouth, his stomach had no complaints about the substance. Sakura was a better cook than her. Hell, he was a better cook. Still, given the lack of instant ramen, grocery stores, ramen stand or anything really, this was probably the best he was going to get anytime soon. That and he didn't want it to piss Madara off. I see. So if I understand this correctly, you bested me while I had the combined might of all the tail beasts as well as a creepy Hashirama face in my chest, added his considerable strength on top of my own. Of all which I did was to force the world into an endless dream where they'd be happy for the name of peace. But I was betrayed by some kind of shadow man that proceeded to summon some kind of chakra goddess that wanted to eat everything. Am I right? She ran her fingers along the rim of her bowl, staring at the liquid. Even she wasn't immune to the taste of her own cooking with the way she shivered after another mouthful of the chunk. He nodded. Well, I had help. Sasuke was there, Sakura and Kakashi Sensei too. And do you still hold this power? Her smile was the flash of a dagger, but much more dangerous. She licked a bit of the stew that clung to the top of her lips, her eyes not once leaving his. Well, I don't have all the tail beast inside me, but Kurama's still here, he shrugged, and I can still do sage mode and some awesome stuff like that. Ha! She tossed her bowl to her right, sending it into the kitchen sink without breaking it. Both of her hands gripped her knees and she rocked on her cushion. Cute, strong, honest, resourceful. You have many. She paused, wiping her mouth one last time. His body burned under her gaze for fire. Desirable traits, Naruto. Did you not think that telling me of the future would be a bad idea? No. Why? He asked, scratching his head, trying really hard to not look at Madara. At least this time she didn't have her sword out. I mean, it was the best way to get you to believe that I wasn't trying to kill you or anything, right? And hey, you're the one believing that I'm from the future. Another laugh, this one overflowing with mirth. She rested the back of her hand against her forehead, pushing against some of the more defiant, wild raven colored hair. It died down quickly enough. Indeed, either you are too honest or I am too trusting. Perhaps both. She stood, her black eyes looked charcoal ready to combust to life. Once more bored into him. But I am no fool, Naruto, and you are no liar. Madara sat down next to him, leaning in close, one hand on his leg, the other one pulling his jacket. While there is much more of your story that is lacking, and much more that seems impossible, there are traces of truth to be found elsewhere. He felt so powerless to stop her as she unzipped his jacket, letting it fall to the floor behind him. What are you doing? Exploring, she answered, her eyes looking at his stomach around where the seal would be. He could feel her hand grazing his stomach without touching him. A twitch escaped him, making him groan. There you are. Kurama, was it? Yes, that is indeed the nine-tailed fox. Time has tempered his rage and strengthened his spirit. He says that if you try to control him again, he will kill you this time. It was easy to ignore Kurama, mostly because he was like a giant cat, normally slept most of the day anyways. Does that apply to the nine-tailed beast that roams my time, or just him? She chuckled, pulling away, and turned her attention to his jacket. Not that it matters. I am beginning to see the merits of this piece that fool Hashirama speaks of, especially if your Konoha is the result. She pulled out his wallet, thumping open his ninja ID. Your truth about the nine-tailed fox, the honesty in your voice, this photo, and the material of your clothing, your armor, are all the evidence I need to believe you. Oh good, so you're not going to try to kill me? You used the word try that time. The edge in her voice was hard to miss, mostly because she whispered into his ears. One of his kunai was in her hand, resting just above his heart, like a snake basking in the sun. But yes, I have no intent to kill you, provided you stay on my good side. How do I do that? And why did she keep holding on to weapons against me? She spun the kunai in her fingers and gave it back to him. Her smile faded, and when she stood, her hands flat against her back. A question with no answer, but you are off to a good start. Continue to treat me as a woman and as an equal, and I won't try to kill you. She smirked, taking her seat once more. Oh, and help me, of course. With what? He put on his jacket once more. Probably not a good idea to tell her that her cooking was bad anytime soon. And what did that even mean? He was just treating her that same as he would any cute girl that was at least mildly violent, which growing up was most of them. For him, your history, my future, leaves much to be desired. That knowing smirk appeared once more. He could see the ambitions growing in her eyes. First, instead of that fool Hashirama, I shall become this Hokage you speak of. Then I shall find and kill this shadow man for daring to think that he could use and betray me. From there we shall see. Wait, you wanted to be the Hokage now? He stood, pointing a finger at her. I want to be the Hokage. I was going to be the 7th Hokage. And I will be the first. She stood up with him, hands on her hip. Instead of the 7th, you could be the 2nd. Or perhaps I will find some other use for you. Her hand slid along his chain mail shirt, sending a wave of excitement through his body. Once more she was close to him, her body coiling around him like a python, a mere thought away from a lethal strike. I am sure I can find many uses for you. It was impossible to face her. Her brilliance shined like the early morning sun, blinding him from his goals and forcing the weariness from his body. I'll help you kill Zetsu, but I won't help you become Hokage. Oh, she purred, her voice hot on his ears. She pushed him away with a laugh and smile. Very well, Naruto. Just know that those who compete with me tend to have their ambitions cut short. Now then, allow me to show you to my spare room. You will be staying with me for the time being. That is, if you can stomach my horrible food. How the hell did she know? You wear your emotions on your sleeve. Damn mind-reading Uchihas, he said in a grunt and low voice. Link break. Being in the past sucked for many reasons. One was that there was no running water, another no electricity, and he didn't have any of his friends. He didn't have even his own house. But by far the worst part was that there was no ramen. Sure, Madara had heard of it, but no ramen stand in the Uchiha village, and the whole no instant ramen thing was a serious bummer. It was those thoughts that were chasing away sleep. The comfort of Madara's spare bed had long since vanished. It didn't help that he had gone to bed so early, but there was nothing else to do. How did people entertain themselves in past? Training? Probably. Maybe that was how the first Hokage and Madara got so strong. Training to be out of boring. Maybe they read. Nah, it had to be the training thing. But he couldn't do that now, mostly because Madara was asleep, and he was in a village that was literally crawling with angry Sasuke's. Why was Madara a girl anyways? Had she always been a girl? Does she turn into a grumpy dude in the near future? Sure, that hair was the same, but if he kind of thought about it, they had the same face, but they were completely different people, especially personality-wise. Especially this Madara laughed, and surely She was mostly laughing at him, but it was still kind of cute laugh. No, really, why the hell was Mother Uchiha girl? A hot one at that too. At least he wasn't thinking about ramen now anymore. Crap. With a sigh, he flopped his arms and stared up at the dark ceiling. He used to be so good at sleeping when he was bored. Now he couldn't sleep because he was bored. Growing up sucked. His door slid open, flooding the room with moonlight. Madara's silhouette stood in the entranceway, her shadow swallowing him whole, and her eyes glowing with the soft red of the Sharingan. He strained his neck to look at her more directly. Madara? Ah, you're awake. That's good. She stood into his room and closed the door behind her, crossing her in a shroud of darkness. He could feel her every step on the tatami mats that made up the floor, and could see the sway of her hips, even in darkness, clinging to her every motion. Why are you? He followed her loose hand as she pulled her sachet loose, but it was the sound of her robe falling brought a clarity to his darkened vision. She was naked in front of him, modest breast size high on her chest. Her stomach was toned and long, stretching downwards before it flared out into her hips. There was her legs, long, wonderful pillars of feminine power. What are? She kneeled down next to him, placing a finger on his lips as she tossed his blanket to the side. It should be obvious, Naruto. We are going to have sex. Somehow, the hardest boner he ever had just got twice as hard. Sex? He asked in a low voice, grabbing onto her arm. Why was he stopping this? Was he stupid? Well, yes, but at the same time, sex with a hot girl that might be only slightly evil. Shouldn't we be dating or something first, or like in love or something? Love? She snorted into a chuckle even as she proceeded to pull his boxer off. His shirt was quick to follow, with one leg on either side of him, a hand on his chest to keep him pinned. She angled him for entry. Love has nothing to do with it. I find you attractive, you find me attractive, that is all there is to it. Her kiss spread like a wildfire through his mind, burning away many resistance and leaving his stomach tasting of blood. Having sex with Madara was a lot more fun than fighting her, but also a lot harder in so many ways of the words. Apparently being power hungry spread to being sex hungry. She was insatiable. No matter how many times he defeated her, no matter how many different ways, she was always back up for more and dragging him along for the ride. Despite his lack of sleep, moderate to severe dehydration, the fact that his back felt like he cuddled with a cheese grater, and that his bed was fused to his body via blood, he felt pretty alright. Not great, but at the same time the sex was fantastic. He had sex with Madara Uchiha. Madara Uchiha was someone he really wanted to have sex with. Those were the thoughts that occupied his mind as he stared up at the ceiling, slowly letting the fact that he had sex with a smoking hot Madara that was a smoking hot girl with kisses that still made his lips tremble and forced him to find just enough energy to be aroused again. If he wasn't so sure he hadn't gotten much of if any sleep last night, he would have considered this whole thing a dream. But the pain on his back and the pulsing headache was all the evidence to the contrary he needed. That, and he could still feel where Madara had traces her finger along his chest as she stared at him like a meal to be eaten. The blanket had been casted over her so that gorgeous amount of hip cleavage could be seen. Her legs entwined with his and her chest was exposed. How had he mistaken her for a man before? It seemed so impossible. The smugness and the self-satisfaction that radiated off of her made him want to punch and kiss her all over again. But she was gone now. The sway of her hips burned into the early morning sunlight that was quickly turning into midday. Even before meeting Jiraiya, he had a healthy appreciation for the male body as a whole. Boobs, tummies, butts, legs, all of it was wonderful. But after seeing Madara's ass and having those legs wrapped around his in so many different ways, he was starting to favor the lower parts of the body just the slightest bit more. With a grunt and far more pops and snaps than normal, he got up from his bed, feeling more than any scab break away the wound already healing. His whole body felt stiff and drained, but at the same time he felt full of a different kind of energy, one that made it easy to put his feet under him and go looking for that most dangerous of women. A dark blue robe with folded so that the Uchiha symbol was presented barred his exit. A still steaming cup and a few simple looking biscuits sat on their own plate nearby. Breakfast, reward, or bait. It doesn't matter. He was too hungry to not to eat it. The bread was hard and filled with a sweet jelly, and the tea was so bitter it felt like a punch to the face. The smell alone was enough to wake him up even more. The clothes he arrived in were long now nowhere to be seen. So unless he wanted to walk around naked, he'd have to put on an Uchiha robe. The act almost hurt his soul, like she was putting a collar on him. Well, jokes on her. Naruto Uzumaki was his own man, a man that wasn't quite comfortable with walking out naked in a town filled with extra angry versions of Sasuke. People talked enough about them as it was. He saw those magazines and Ino even showed him a book someone publishing that went into great detail over their relationship. It was like Icha Icha Paradise but gay. It just meant to show that there were still great evils in this world. The robe fit well enough and it wasn't as uncomfortable as the other fancier robes he had to put on had been. But really, how did they fight in these things? Wouldn't a shirt and pants be easier? Oh wait, they were pants problems solved. Soon enough, he was dressed and looking very bit the Uchiha, just better looking, not depressed, and a better ninja. Madara's home was an L shape with the bedrooms made up one side and the rest of the rooms made another, joined only at the hinge by the door. Nestled between the two sides was a training yard, a small pond, and an unattended garden were backdrop to the main attraction, a flat circle of well-walked earth and several training dummies that had seen better days. In its center, dressed in a black robe with her bare feet gliding across the dirt, was Madara. Eyes closed, her face was fixated in the usual permanent scowl that must be a genetic condition, but at the same time she looked oddly peaceful as her hands flowed like river moving at the same constant pace. Do you like always taking so long to get up? She didn't so much as look at him, but a smile grew on her face all the same. The difference was night and day with her. She continued to move in the slow controlled pattern, her feet not so much as leaving a trace as she moved. It was as hypnotic as she was. What are you doing? He asked, stepping off the sun-warmed wood that made up the pathway that connected the home and onto the grass that still wet with dew. Training. Would you like to join me? Few can catch me. She didn't stop moving, her stance shifted so that she faced him, one hand outstretched at him, beckoning him to challenge. I will not blame you for declining. It shows you know who your better is. If she wanted to go, then alright. He did not back down from a challenge. Besides, there was no way that she was better, or his better to be precise, at everything. Like he probably had more chakra and cooler jutsus. What do I do? Both of her hands took up a typical fighting stance. We fight. Eyes closed, hands not touching and never more than 2 inches from each other. Sounded simple enough. He did something before with glee, except a lot faster and actually punchy. He matched her stance, the pebbles grinding against his feet, and his hand shook for a moment before steadying. Alright, how do we tell who loses? Her smile turned into the mocking smirk, that classic mocking smirk that he was beginning to despise with every fiber of his being. You will know when you have failed. As this is your first time, you may keep your eyes open if you wish, but be warned, it does make it harder. I don't need a handicap. Ready when you are. Begin. When he fought Lee, he had used sound and the thudding of the dojo's mats to find where his foe was, but here, surrounded by the ardor against a foe that made no sound, he truly felt blind to everything. This was about knowing his foe properly, or some other ancient and outdated technique that was all about being in tune with his body, which he was. He was a ninja and mastered Sage Chakra. It might have been cheating, but it was his best option, and she never said he couldn't use it. He could see her chakra and her hands moving at the same steady pace. He had wildly missed where she was going, and it was only blind luck that he hadn't touched her hands. Her feet were also moving, drawing closer to him. You needed to correct this interesting technique, Naruto. She purred through the darkness. He could feel her smile through her chakra, mocking him constantly. Maybe this was why the Uchiha were so fucked up. They had to put up with Madara's teasing them so that they developed childhood trauma. Had to be. Don't play catch up. Keep the pace. It was a lot harder than it looked, so I wanted to ask you something. He had to move his right hand quick to avoid hers. His feet made ground against the dirt, sounding like a cannon blast in the silentness of Madara's yard. Ask away, but you may not get the answers you seek. Okay, he could do this. It wasn't like he had crippling social anxiety when it came to dealing with feelings or anything. Nope, he was a straightforward man. Always had been. Always will be. So, about last night. She moaned, her chakra dancing like fire. Are you sure you can concentrate while talking about that? Yes. He nearly slipped and touched her hand, which earned him a mocking chuckle from Madara. He was really starting to hate that sound, if you are certain. But which part about the last night? She turned her back, facing him for no more than a breath, her feet moving no faster than the snail pace of her hands, yet still she maintained perfect balance. No doubt she was grinning up a storm. He grounded his teeth, trying to keep up with her. His feet fell hard against the dirt when he turned to meet her. His hands nearly touched hers once more. Well, damn it, what are we? We are ninja. Her voice lacked the humor it had one moment ago. But you don't need to tell me But you don't need me to tell you that, don't you? So speak your feelings true, Naruto. The humor returned, followed by a chuckle that sent a shock up and down his spine. I know you like it when I bite. That's what I'm trying to ask, he muttered. It was really hard to ignore the warmth of his face and his growing excitement. What does last night make us? More chuckling, and she started to be more aggressive with her stance, both hands moving on their own, her feet twisting and shifting with an ease that felt unnatural. Now we get to the real question. Worry not, Naruto. I know exactly what we are. I know who I am, and what you are to me. It is only a matter of you accepting it. Care to explain? He took a hard step backwards. He yanked his hand back to try and stop her from touching his. More than 3 inches, a lot more. He was losing his footing. We are lovers, she purred, her hand touching him in the chest. Just enough to send him tumbling to the ground in defeat. But he never reached to the ground. I am Uchiha Madara, and you? He opened his eyes to see her looming over him. She held him up by the folds of his robe while still holding him down with one hand. She had beaten him in this game of balance, patience and grace, but that didn't mean she was better than him and me. Madara's eyes sparkled like embers, taking to fresh kindly, and her smile grew so much more quick and wild. She leaned in close, somehow keeping them both balanced. Her breath mixed with his, and he could feel the ghost of her lips on his once more, like chasing a dream after just waking up. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, are mine. It was really hard to protest to anything when her tongue was down his throat. Being a bastard had to be hereditary, at least in the male population of the Uchiha. Madara wasn't a bastard. Well, she was crazy, really crazy, but she was far from the norm. While most women kept their heads down, Madara kept her head high. Few seemed willing to challenge the aura of leadership she displayed in her every action. Unfortunately, the one that did challenge her was a loud and obnoxious bastard among the bastards. I cannot follow for you anymore. I cannot allow for you to parade this lesser ninja around town. Sanosuke shouted. His face was red and growing redder as he continued to kick and scream like a child that had his toy taken away. It was subtle, but the crowd was slowly taking sides. Those that favored Sanosuke were mostly old men. Madara's was every woman and a host of young warriors. In all, she outnumbered him a great deal. If she cared about any of this, was known only to her. She held up an onion, bouncing it on her palm a few times. You will be cooking tonight. This onion is good. Can you make use of it? Yes, Sonosuke was shouting at her, and the village looked ready for a civil war. Madara was shopping for ramen ingredients, one that apparently he will be cooking tonight. It was his fault, really, because he said her stew growled at him. It really didn't. And he kept talking about ramen. I think we can have an onion slice with it if you want. It was normally in his ramen at Ichiraku, but it wasn't the first or last thing he went for. She placed it into the brown sack that had seen better days on top of the noodles and other ingredients. Excellent. That is everything, is it not? She dusted her hands off as though to be rid of the task. Well, we shall drop this off and then you will. A sword flew between them so that he stared at his own reflection for a few moments. A silence that not even that would disturb followed, growing louder and more annoyed. With each passing moment he looked to Sasuke, whose face was one of pure rage, in contrast to the amused smile that he could see growing on Madara's. She was enjoying this way too much. Madara, this has gone on far enough. I demand you surrender the role of leader, or you take my hand in marriage. Sanosuke growled, whispers spread among the Uchiha, most in shock. But a few joined Sanosuke. Those that supported Madara were silent. If you will not do either, then fight me for the right. I will decide which one I... A sharp laugh erupted from Madara. She clutched at her side and with one hand resting on her sword hilt. She was starting to understand why she carried that with her. That laugh was one of pure joy and amusement, and the smile that followed was the most joyful smile he had ever seen an Uchiha make. Even if it was coated in a layer of bloodlust and pride so thick he could feel his blood coagulating in his veins. The laughter died into the silence once more, but the smile remained. You make demands of me, Sanosuke. You wish to control me. To control me simply because I am a woman you disagree with. She stepped towards him, disturbing not a pebble, making not a sound. Do not assume my respect for my sister as weakness. You do not control me, and you will never control the Uchiha. You cannot challenge me. Her every word carried with it a dare, begging Sanosuke to try something, anything. He did not deliver. I see. Madara turned her smile, small, prideful, filled with mirth towards him. Once more a singular eyebrow raised. Come on now, Naruto. There is much I to accomplish today. All eyes were on him now, and all of Sanosuke's fury. The man's face was stuck in what he considered to be a basic Uchiha emotion number 3, pure unadulterated rage. His Sharingan was activated, every tomb promising a new and interesting that if he didn't watch his step. Why couldn't every Uchiha be the kind of Madara happy/crazy that Madara was? Not that he swung that way. I'm with her. He made it about half a step before there was a sword at his throat once more. Instead of a really hot lady at the end of it was a crazy bastard. He preferred his crazy to at least be a mild attractive. You don't belong here, outsider. Sanosuke, every breath was a growl. His step dragged across the ground. I will slay you for influencing our leader. Wasn't he trying to influence their leader? Madara stood with her arms crossed, the damn mocking smile on her face. There was no way she was going to help him, was there? Madara, what should I do? The smile twitched and she shook her head, her hair falling over her shoulder for just a moment. Do as you wish, just make it quick. Saw that coming. If I fight you, will you go away? Judging by the sword sticking out of his stomach, that answer was no. Felt like his, what was the organ called again? Liver. Pancreas. Right. That thing was cut. Man, Why that thing, even after it healed his piss would still smell funny. And where was he aiming? Why not the heart? He was standing still. He could have gone for the throat or even the heart. Something that would actually do damage. Maybe he was trying to prove a point. Wait, was that bastard monologuing right now? Nope, just glaring and smiling at him. Big surprise. Oh wait, he was supposed to be fighting, right? What was the tactic that Sakura liked to use? Overwhelming force and awe, or something like that. In less than a breath, he gathered the natural chakra and mixed it with Kurama's own strength, and Rasengan Sanosuke into the dirt with a charm and chakra arm. The crowd was in shock. A few were even smiling now, but Madara's smile had vanished. Did he go too far? He pulled out the sword and left it next to the still breathing corpse of Sanosuke and left it there. Look, I'm sorry, I didn't want to fight you. Madara's gaze followed him like the frost of winter. When he was a step away, she turned, maintaining the same one and a half step she favored. He was alright with it, as well as it gave him just enough room to stare at her ass. He then thought it was beneath her clothes. She was silent on their way back to her home, and her stance was aggressive. Her head snapped towards him, glaring sharp. I didn't upset you or anything, did I? You allowed yourself to be injured. Her voice carried a brab. He didn't heard from her before. And why stop moving? Why? To prove a point? To make me laugh? To show how strong you are? No, I didn't mean to let him stab me. He held up the groceries he was still holding. I was still holding these. She growled, and he saw the smallest flash of her steel. When I said you're mine, I mean it. That means the only ones that gets to stab you is mine. Do you understand? I'd prefer if you didn't stab me as well. That seemed like a reasonable request, especially since they were in a relationship. Even if it was the weirdest relationship he'd ever been in. Or it was his first relationship. Well, it was only the first relationship he has been. But he was fairly certain this wasn't normal. Her smile returned and her hand was off her sword once more, as would I. In the future you will refrain from injuring yourself unless I say otherwise. That sounds more impossible than the fact that he was back in time and having sex, fantastic sex with the smoking hot female Madara. So, actually possible. I have gone a day without getting hurt since I showed up here. Then you will learn. Link break. After the food had been dropped off and a few clones were left to cook a mistake, as Madara ordered 2 more in order to clean her home. She led him away from the village, followed the same path they had taken the village. So, where are you taking me? He was trying to read this woman as like pulling teeth, especially when she was this quiet. It was a lucky guess that he found out she was angry with him. Thankfully, she was actually mature and didn't just pretend like everything was fine. Wait, how old was she? She'll probably find that out soon. Not that it mattered too much. Anyways, now, you will have the answer once we get there. In the meantime, silence, will you? She didn't turn back to look at him. Her gaze focused on the path ahead of them. Her hands were still. She led him through the wilderness, across the river and up a cliff. Not a single animal disturbed the silence that Madara desired. Even the river seemed tame at her pacing. It was on a cliff that overlooked a valley filled with trees and a large lake. Did they finally come to a stop? A lone tree with pink leaves dominated the cliff, standing in defiance to the elements that threatened to push it off. At the base sat down something he knew all too well, a grave. Etched into the stone was the name Izumi. Madara kneeled before the grave and placed her head against the ground for a moment. He shouldn't be here. This was a private matter. I shouldn't be here. Saying better, nothing might have been better. No, Madara all but whispered in anger, lifting her head up. Stay, I desire your presence. Biting his lips, he kneeled down beside her, doing everything he could to show proper respect for someone he did not even knew. This is my sister, Izumi, killed by Tobirama Senju in battle, Madara said softly. It took all he had not to reach out and try to hold her. My father. Tajima was also killed by the Senju. Many in my village have also been killed by the Senju. I will not lie and say that I did not hate them for the longest of time. Then one day, this tree appeared here. It had to be that of fool Hashirama's. Only he would think that a simple plant would make up for my sister's death. But it is because of this tree that I began to consider the peace that he desires. He showed respect to the dead even when he did not need to. What's to say he could not show respect to the living? She lowered her head once more and silence followed again. The shadow grew longer before she sat up once more. Thank you for your company, Naruto. It shames me to say this, but it hurts less when you're around. He stood offering his hand to her. For once she took it. Her touch lingered, the roughness of her closed hands burned into his mind. Who knew she had a soft side, especially one that was willing to show him. You're welcome. But why did you bring me here? So that you understand what Konoha demands of me. It demands that we Uchiha change and lift the curses that plagues us. Her smile appeared once more, at least for a few generations. What about you? Did you still have hatred? He asked. She drew closer, pulling his arms around her for a moment. He was hugging Madara. Make no mistake, I'd go on a murderous rampage if they killed you. You might be able to lift my curse. Damn it. Why the hell was she so sexy, cute, adorable into him? And drop dead gorgeous, but also really crazy. As this is where I'm going to be leaving this part of, guys. I hope you like this one, and if you do, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. And this is Apollo Uchiha, and I'm signing out. Peace.